December 27, 1941, Vågsøy, Norway. The frozen harbor lay silent under a ceiling of gray clouds, its waters black as crude oil. German sentries huddled near braziers, rifles slung across shoulders dulled by months of occupation duty. The war had moved elsewhere, to Russia, to Africa, to the Atlantic depths. Here in this forgotten port town, the Third Reich's Atlantic Wall was merely a concept. Concrete not yet poured, guns not yet mounted, men not yet trained for what was coming. At 08:48 hours, the silence shattered. They came from the sea like something out of Viking legend. Green berets cutting through morning mist, Fairbairn Sykes daggers gleaming, faces blackened with cork and determination. No preliminary bombardment, no massed formations, just sudden, overwhelming violence delivered with surgical precision. Within 18 minutes, the port's command center was a smoking ruin. Within an hour, German officers who had conquered Poland and France in weeks found themselves prisoners, staring at soldiers whose methods they could not comprehend, whose discipline seemed forged in some furnace unknown to conventional military doctrine. Major Hans Keller, captured that morning, would later write in his interrogation report, "These are not soldiers. These are something else entirely." The Wehrmacht of 1940 had crushed Europe with a military machine perfected through decades of Prussian tradition and modern innovation. Blitzkrieg was not merely tactics, it was industrial warfare elevated to art form. Panzer divisions supported by Stuka dive bombers had rendered French fortifications obsolete in 6 weeks. The Luftwaffe had brought Warsaw to its knees in days. German officers, products of rigorous academy training and battlefield experience, understood warfare as a science of logistics, combined arms, and overwhelming force applied at decisive points. They expected their enemies to fight according to established doctrines: front lines, reserves, artillery preparation, infantry advance. The British had proven formidable at sea and stubborn in the air during the Battle of Britain, but their ground forces, evacuated from Dunkirk with barely their rifles, seemed broken. Intelligence reports described an island fortress under siege, rationing food, converting parks to vegetable gardens, melting railings for munitions. The coastal fortifications stretching from Norway to Brittany reflected this confidence. Thousands of kilometers of conquered coastline, garrisoned by occupation troops. Older men, convalescents, and units rotated from the Eastern Front for rest. Security was procedural, patrols at scheduled intervals, sentries at designated posts, checkpoints manned according to regulation. The British, trapped on their island, could launch no serious invasion. The occasional RAF raid was expected. Resistance fighters were nuisances, not threats. Then the raids began, not invasions, raids. Small-scale operations that violated every principle of force ratio and conventional assault. On March 4, 1941, British forces struck the Lofoten Islands. On December 26, Vågsøy. On February 27, 1942, Bruneval. Each operation surgically precise, each achieving objectives that should have required divisions, with forces numbering fewer than 200 men. German after-action reports struggled with terminology. These were not reconnaissance patrols, not infiltration teams, not partisan operations. The attackers moved with military discipline but struck with guerrilla ferocity. They achieved tactical objectives, destroying radar installations, capturing encryption equipment, demolishing factories, then vanished before reinforcements could respond. Oberst Friedrich Weber, Coastal Defense Commander for Sector 7, wrote to High Command in March 1942, "We are defending against an enemy who does not respect the mathematical realities of warfare. They appear where they should not be, accomplish what should be impossible, and disappear before our response can be coordinated. Request immediate review of security protocols and force disposition." The review never came. The Eastern Front consumed all attention, all resources, all strategic focus. The Commandos continued their education. The psychological impact preceded the physical toll. German coastal units, accustomed to occupation duty's monotony, began experiencing something unknown to modern European warfare: the constant anxiety of being hunted. Sentries reported shadows that proved to be nothing, or perhaps something that had already moved. Patrols returned with stories of sounds in the darkness: the scrape of a boat hull against rock, the click of a weapon being readied, the whisper of movement through underbrush. Most were nerves. Some were not. Lieutenant Hans Dreyer, stationed at Dieppe, kept a private journal later captured by Canadian forces. June 3, 1942, another false alarm. Mueller swears he saw figures on the beach. We found nothing, no footprints, no evidence. But the radar station 30 kilometers north was destroyed last week. 7 men dead, all by knife. No shots fired. How does one defend against ghosts? The methods unnerved professional soldiers. Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized firepower, maneuver, combined arms. The Commandos operated by different mathematics entirely. They studied individual targets for weeks, photographing from submarines, interrogating escaped prisoners, analyzing architectural plans stolen by resistance networks. When they struck, they knew the layout better than the defenders, which doors opened inward, which sentries changed at what intervals, which ammunition dumps were vulnerable. They carried specialized weapons, silenced Steen guns, fighting knives designed by a Shanghai police officer, explosive charges molded to precise specifications. They moved through defensive perimeters like water through gaps in a dam. Most disturbing was their physical conditioning. German soldiers were fit by continental standards, capable of forced marches, competent in close combat. The Commandos were something else. They could swim miles in frigid North Atlantic waters, scale cliffs in full equipment, engage in hand-to-hand combat with techniques borrowed from martial traditions across the British Empire, then force march back to extraction points carrying wounded comrades and captured intelligence. Medical officers examining captured commandos reported muscle density and cardiovascular capacity, suggesting training regimens bordering on inhuman. Hauptmann Otto Braun, interrogating a wounded commando after the Bruneval raid, asked how long their training lasted. 12 weeks of selection, the prisoner replied, then specialized training until we're ready. Some men trained for 2 years before their first operation. Braun, who had completed Wehrmacht officer school in 18 months and considered himself well-trained, found himself staring at a man who had spent longer preparing for war than most soldiers spent fighting it. What kind of army, he wrote later, invests such resources in mere raiders? March 28, 1942, Saint-Nazaire, France. The German naval base housed one of the Reich's most strategic assets, the Normandy dock, the only facility on the Atlantic coast capable of servicing the battleship Tirpitz. If the Tirpitz entered Atlantic convoy lanes, the entire Allied supply chain to Britain would be jeopardized. The dock was protected by everything modern warfare could deploy: coastal batteries, anti-aircraft guns, submarine nets, patrol boats, and an entire garrison. The Commandos rammed an obsolete destroyer, HMS Campbelltown, into the dock gates. The ship had been modified to resemble a German vessel, allowing it to approach through the Loire estuary without immediately raising alarms. When challenged, the Commandos responded with authentic German call signs obtained through intelligence operations. By the time defenders realized the deception, Campbelltown had rammed the gates at 17 knots. Commandos poured ashore, engaging defenders in savage close-quarters combat, while demolition teams planted charges throughout the dock's pumping stations and winding houses. The ship's bow contained 4 tons of delayed-action explosives hidden in concrete-encased chambers. German officers boarding the wreck the following morning to assess damage believed they had repulsed the attack. At 11:30 hours on March 28th, Campbelltown detonated. The explosion killed hundreds of German soldiers and technicians examining the vessel. The dock gate, already rammed, now ceased to exist. The pumping mechanisms that could have emptied and repaired the facility were destroyed. The Normandy dock would remain inoperative for the remainder of the war. The Tirpitz would never risk Atlantic operations. Korvettenkapitän Lothar Fischer survived the blast by chance. He had left the destroyer 5 minutes before detonation to file his preliminary report. His hands shook as he wrote the final assessment. The enemy planned this operation knowing they would suffer catastrophic casualties. Of 622 Royal Navy and Commando personnel committed, 168 were killed and 215 captured. They accepted these losses to destroy a dock. They converted an obsolete warship into a precision munition. They studied our procedures well enough to impersonate our communications protocols. They fought through our defenses with grenades and knives when ammunition ran out. They smiled when captured, as if participating in a victory rather than a defeat. He paused, pen hovering over paper, then added, "We trained to fight the British Army. These are not the British Army. These are crusaders who have somehow acquired modern weapons and modern training. God help us when they come in strength. High Command dismissed the report as shock-induced hyperbole. The Tirpitz remained bottled in Norwegian fjords, its strategic potential neutralized by 622 men in small boats. The raids created a psychological phenomenon unprecedented in Wehrmacht experience: defensive paranoia at strategic scale. By mid-1942, Hitler himself had become obsessed with defending thousands of kilometers of coastline against an enemy who could strike anywhere, with forces too small to detect, but large enough to cause catastrophic damage. The Führer Directive of May 1942 ordered massive fortification construction: concrete bunkers, beach obstacles, minefields, garrison reinforcements, consuming resources desperately needed in Russia and North Africa. Thousands of tons of concrete that could have built tank obstacles at Stalingrad instead poured into Atlantic Wall fortifications, defending against an invasion that might never come. Divisions that could have reinforced Rommel in Egypt instead guarded Norwegian fjords where Commandos had struck once and might strike again. The mere possibility of commando raids forced Germany to defend everywhere, achieving strategic dispersion through tactical harassment. German officers recognized the trap but could not escape it. After each raid, commanders faced impossible questions. How many men constitute adequate defense? The Commandos had struck targets defended by company-strength units, and won. Should every potential target receive battalion-level protection? The coastline stretched too far. Should mobile reserves be positioned for rapid response? The Commandos accomplished objectives and withdrew before reserves could deploy. Should defenses be hardened with concrete and steel? The Commandos adapted, targeting weak points or simply striking elsewhere. Major Wilhelm Schreiber, tasked with coastal defense assessment in Normandy, produced a report in August 1942 that read like a confession of professional inadequacy. Traditional military calculation assumes rational force deployment. The enemy requires X soldiers to capture Y objective. We deploy X plus Z soldiers to defend it, achieving security through mathematical superiority. The Commandos invalidate this mathematics. They use specialized training, surprise, and tactical innovation to achieve force multiplication beyond conventional calculation. A 12-man commando team possesses combat effectiveness equivalent to a conventional platoon. A 200-man raid inflicts damage requiring division-strength forces to repair. He concluded with a question that High Command never satisfactorily answered: how does one defend against an enemy who treats impossible missions as routine assignments? The answer, gradually understood through painful experience, was that one could not completely. Every kilometer of coastline could not be impregnable. Every garrison could not be alert every hour. Every defensive position could not be reinforced against every contingency. The Commandos had discovered warfare's fundamental asymmetry. Defenders must succeed everywhere, always. Attackers need succeed only somewhere, once. The strategic calculus had inverted. Britain, trapped on an island, was not under siege. Germany, controlling a continent, was defending against ghosts. The intelligence war evolved in parallel with the physical raids. British intelligence, humiliated by pre-war failures and German successes across Europe, had rebuilt itself into an instrument of unprecedented sophistication. The Special Operations Executive, formed in July 1940 with Churchill's directive to set Europe ablaze, coordinated partisan networks, sabotage operations, and intelligence gathering across occupied territories. The Commandos served as the sharp edge of a vast intelligence apparatus that penetrated German defenses through psychology, bribery, coercion, and occasionally simple human decency. French resistance fighters, initially fragmented and ineffective, began providing detailed intelligence on German installations in exchange for commando support. Norwegian fishermen, risking execution, reported ship movements and garrison rotations. Belgian railway workers sabotaged supply lines while documenting German logistics. Each successful commando raid validated this collaboration, proof that London had not abandoned occupied Europe, that resistance was not futile, that liberation remained possible. German counterintelligence, the Abwehr, found itself playing a losing game. Admiral Canaris himself acknowledged in a private conversation intercepted by British signals intelligence: "We are fighting an intelligence organization that learns from every operation, adapts to every countermeasure, and possesses moral authority among occupied populations. Our agents offer money, theirs offer hope." The Dieppe raid of August 19, 1942, illustrated both the power and limitations of this intelligence network. Canadian forces, supported by British commandos, launched the largest raid yet attempted, 6,000 men against a heavily defended port. Unlike previous surgical strikes, Dieppe aimed to test invasion feasibility. Could Allied forces seize and hold a major port? The answer was devastating. German defenders, reinforced after months of commando harassment, inflicted catastrophic casualties. 3,623 Canadian soldiers killed, wounded, or captured in 9 hours. The raid seemed a disaster, a massive failure that validated German defensive doctrine. Yet Oberst Horst Mendel, analyzing after-action reports, noticed something disturbing. The main assault failed catastrophically, yet the flanking commando operations, demolishing coastal batteries at Berneval and Varangeville, succeeded completely. Small teams achieved objectives while the main force was slaughtered. This suggests intentional asymmetry. Were the Canadians sacrificed to test our defenses while commandos accomplished the actual mission? The question haunted German intelligence for months. Had Dieppe been a genuine failure or an elaborate intelligence-gathering operation disguised as a conventional assault? Were the Allies incompetent or playing a deeper game than German analysts could comprehend? They would not learn the answer until June 6, 1944, when every lesson from Dieppe's failure informed D-Day's success. The commandos forced German officers to confront uncomfortable truths about military culture and national character. Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized collective discipline, hierarchical obedience, and technological superiority. Individual initiative was valued within narrow parameters. Officers made tactical decisions, soldiers executed orders. The system produced magnificent coordination at operational scale, but struggled when confronted with opponents who empowered individual soldiers to improvise, adapt, and overcome through personal capability rather than institutional process. A captured commando training manual, found after a raid on the Channel Islands, circulated through Wehrmacht officer circles like heretical scripture. It contained photographs of men climbing cliffs with knives in their teeth, swimming through ice-choked waters, engaging in unarmed combat training that resembled ancient warfare more than modern soldiering. The manual's introduction stated, "Every commando must be capable of independent action. If you are the last man alive, you complete the mission alone." General Major Anton Weiss, reviewing the manual, wrote to his wife, "They are training men to be heroes, not soldiers. Our military tradition emphasizes the unit over the individual, the platoon, the company, the division. We are cogs in a magnificent machine. These British treat each man as if he were an army unto himself. It is inefficient, romantic, impractical, and terrifyingly effective when applied by men willing to die for such romantic impracticality." The contrast extended beyond training methodology. German soldiers fought for duty, fatherland, the abstract glory of the Reich. Many believed in National Socialist ideology. Others simply followed orders. The commandos seemed to fight from some deeper conviction, not merely patriotism, but personal responsibility for their nation's survival. They were volunteers, everyone, who had endured selection processes designed to break them. Those who remained believed they were among Britain's finest warriors, an elite with obligations transcending normal military duty. This self-conception manifested in behavior that baffled German observers. Captured commandos maintained discipline in POW camps that would break normal soldiers. They organized escape attempts with the same meticulous planning applied to raids. They exercised relentlessly, maintaining physical conditioning as if combat might resume at any moment. They showed respect to guards while making clear they considered themselves warriors temporarily inconvenienced, not defeated men. Hauptmann Ludwig Graf, commandant of a POW facility holding captured commandos, reported, "They do not behave as prisoners. They behave as soldiers conducting a defensive operation while awaiting relief. 3 have escaped. 2 were recaptured. The 3rd, we assume, reached Allied lines. When I asked a prisoner why they continue fighting after capture, he replied, 'We volunteered to fight until Britain is free. Britain is not yet free. Therefore, we continue fighting.' This is not military logic. This is religious conviction." By 1943, the strategic situation had transformed dramatically. The tide of war, which had run toward Germany through 1940-1942, began its inexorable reversal. Stalingrad's surrender in February 1943 shattered the Wehrmacht's aura of invincibility. Allied landings in North Africa secured a southern front. The Atlantic convoy system, nearly broken by U-boats in 1942, stabilized through improved tactics and technology. The 1,000-bomber raids began reducing German cities to rubble, demonstrating industrial capacity that Germany could not match. Yet the commando raids continued, not because Britain remained desperate, but because the operations had proven their strategic value. The Combined Operations Headquarters, now under Lord Louis Mountbatten, systematized and expanded commando capabilities. New units formed: special boat sections for maritime infiltration, X-craft submarines for underwater demolition, specialized training schools, teaching skills from mountaineering to languages to safe-cracking. What began as desperate improvisation evolved into institutional expertise. The raid's objectives shifted from pure harassment to invasion preparation. Each operation gathered intelligence on beach gradients, tidal patterns, obstacle configurations, and defensive responses. Commandos tested new equipment: swimming suits that protected against hypothermia, explosive charges that could destroy underwater obstacles, radio beacons for guiding landing craft through darkness. The methodological patience was itself unnerving, suggesting an enemy that thought in years rather than months, that traded casualties for knowledge, that invested in capabilities whose purpose would not become clear until much later. German intelligence recognized the pattern. A December 1943 analysis from Foreign Armies West concluded, "The enemy is conducting a multi-year research program using human subjects willing to die for data. They are mapping our defenses with the thoroughness of cartographers surveying mountain ranges. Every raid, even those that fail, provides information refined into intelligence products supporting eventual invasion. We are being studied like laboratory specimens." The report recommended comprehensive defensive reorganization, abandoning fixed fortifications in favor of mobile reserves, creating dedicated anti-commando rapid response units, investing in night fighting equipment and training. Most recommendations were filed and ignored. Resources flowed east toward the Russian front's insatiable consumption. The Atlantic Wall received concrete and labor, but not the tactical flexibility required to counter an enemy who rewrote tactical doctrine with each operation. Feldmarshal Erwin Rommel, appointed to inspect Atlantic defenses in late 1943, spent weeks examining fortifications and interviewing commanders. His conclusion, delivered to Hitler in January 1944, was professionally diplomatic, but strategically dire. "We have built monuments. The enemy is training ghosts. When invasion comes, our concrete will not save us. Only mobile reserves deployed with speed and intelligence. The British commandos have taught them how we think. We have not learned how they think." The personal cost of commando operations remained hidden behind operational reports and casualty statistics. These were volunteer forces, men who chose the near certainty of death or capture in exchange for the possibility of striking meaningful blows against tyranny. Many came from the ordinary wreckage of Britain's defeated army: clerks, factory workers, teachers, shopkeepers who found themselves evacuated from Dunkirk and determined to return not as victims but as avengers. Others transferred from elite units, paratroopers, Marines, Guards regiments, seeking greater challenge than conventional warfare offered. The selection process was designed to destroy illusions. Trainees endured forced marches carrying equipment loads that would cripple normal soldiers, swam in Scottish lochs where hypothermia killed the careless, climbed sea cliffs where falls meant death on rocks below. Instructors were veterans of colonial wars, Shanghai police officers, big game hunters, mountaineers, men who understood violence as craft rather than mere aggression. They taught killing with clinical precision, which knife angles produced instant death, which unarmed strikes disabled without killing, which explosive charges destroyed targets without wasting materials. Those who survived selection emerged with capabilities that seemed supernatural to conventional soldiers, but were merely the result of obsessive preparation, meeting exceptional motivation. A commando could navigate by stars, survive on minimal rations, endure interrogation through techniques borrowed from intelligence services, and kill silently in darkness. These were not superhuman abilities, merely human capabilities refined through training that accepted extraordinary attrition rates. The Germans captured many. Interrogation reports reveal grudging admiration mixed with incomprehension. A Gestapo interrogator in Paris questioning a commando captured after the Dieppe raid noted, "Subject endured 3 days of enhanced questioning without revealing operational details. Physical examination shows healed injuries inconsistent with recent combat, broken bones, knife scars, burn marks. When asked about these injuries, subjects stated they occurred during training. The British are deliberately injuring their soldiers to prepare them for capture and torture. This suggests institutional cruelty or individual fanaticism beyond normal military culture. The interrogator missed the point entirely. The injuries did not result from deliberate cruelty, but from training realism that accepted casualties during preparation. Men died during commando training, drowning during amphibious exercises, falling during cliff climbing, succumbing to exposure during survival training. The selection process was itself a form of warfare, winnowing volunteers until only those capable of completing impossible missions remained. Lieutenant James Morrison, captured at Dieppe and imprisoned until 1945, survived to write memoirs. One passage addressed German perceptions. They thought we were fanatics or madmen. We were neither. We were simply men who understood the stakes and chose to meet them with every capability we could develop. As 1944 approached, the strategic chess game reached its culmination. Operation Overlord, the cross-channel invasion, would be the largest amphibious operation in history, dependent on intelligence, deception, and capabilities built through years of commando operations. The raids had served multiple purposes simultaneously, gathering intelligence on German defenses, testing equipment and tactics, maintaining morale through offensive action, forcing Germany to disperse forces defending against an invasion that might come anywhere, and creating psychological conditions that would shape the invasion's outcome. German commanders understood invasion was inevitable. The question was where and when. The commando raids, paradoxically, both illuminated and obscured this question. Every raid provided tactical intelligence, this beach gradient, that minefield pattern, those defensive positions. Yet the raids struck across such vast distances that they suggested no clear invasion target. Would the Allies land in Norway, leveraging commando experience in Arctic conditions? Brittany, where multiple raids had tested defenses? Normandy, where quiet sectors might mask preparation? The Pas-de-Calais, closest to England and most heavily defended? Rommel, given command of Army Group B defending northern France and Belgium, implemented emergency measures based on commando lessons. He ordered massive mine laying, over 4 million mines by June 1944. He deployed beach obstacles designed to destroy landing craft, steel hedgehogs, wooden stakes topped with mines, concrete tetrahedrons. He pushed for mobile panzer reserves positioned to counterattack beaches immediately upon invasion. Many of his reforms were inspired by analyzing commando tactics. They struck at dawn. They used specialized equipment. They achieved objectives through speed rather than mass. Yet Rommel faced opposition from high command's orthodox strategists who believed in defense through depth rather than coastal fortification. The panzer divisions remained inland, under central control, unable to respond quickly to invasion. The Atlantic Wall remained a propaganda fiction, concrete strongpoints separated by kilometers of thinly defended beach. The defenses reflected institutional compromise rather than tactical coherence. Meanwhile, the commandos prepared for their ultimate mission. No longer small-scale raiders, they would spearhead D-Day as pathfinders and shock troops. Their targets on June 6th would include the Merville Battery, heavy guns capable of destroying landing craft, and Pegasus Bridge, whose capture would prevent German armor from counterattacking British airborne forces. These missions required everything commandos had trained for: night infiltration, precision demolition, close-quarters combat, and willingness to die holding objectives against counterattacks. The men who volunteered for these missions knew the statistics. D-Day planning assumed 90% casualties among the first wave. Commandos, landing ahead of conventional forces, would face even worse odds. They prepared anyway, with the methodical patience of craftsmen approaching masterwork execution. June 6, 1944. 0007 hours. Normandy coast. Lieutenant Colonel Terence Otway led 150 men of the 9th Parachute Battalion, effectively commandos dropped from aircraft rather than delivered by sea, toward the Merville Battery. Intelligence indicated 4 150mm guns capable of destroying landing craft approaching Sword Beach. The battery was defended by concrete casemates, minefields, barbed wire, machine gun positions, and a garrison of 130 German soldiers. Otway's orders were simple: silence the guns before 0530, when the naval bombardment would lift and landing craft would enter the battery's killing zone. The drop went catastrophically wrong. Pathfinders missed drop zones. Paratroopers scattered across 10 kilometers of flooded countryside. Equipment containers landed in marshes or German positions. Of 750 men committed, only 150 reached the assembly point. Most had lost heavy weapons, radios, mine-clearing equipment. Otway faced a choice: abort and accept that British soldiers would die on Sword Beach, or attack with what he had. At 0430 hours, with dawn approaching, he attacked. The assault was primordial violence delivered with modern weapons. Without mine-clearing equipment, soldiers crawled through minefields accepting casualties. Without Bangalore torpedoes, they cut barbed wire with hands bloodied by wire and shrapnel. Without heavy weapons, they charged concrete bunkers with grenades and bayonets. The fighting devolved into room-to-room murder. Pistols fired at point-blank range, knives wielded in darkness, soldiers strangling each other when ammunition ran out. 75 British soldiers died or were wounded, 50% casualties in 20 minutes. They captured the battery. The guns were destroyed. At 0530, when landing craft approached Sword Beach, the battery remained silent. Oberst Friedrich Krug, commander of the sector reserve, arrived with reinforcements at 600 hours to find his battery destroyed, and survivors describing an assault that defied military logic. They attacked with 150 men against prepared defenses that should require battalion-strength forces. They accepted 50% casualties to destroy 4 artillery pieces. They fought like berserkers, but with disciplined tactical coordination. When we counterattacked, they held long enough for glider reinforcements to arrive, then continued fighting until relieved by seaborne forces. He shook his head, staring at bodies scattered among the bunkers. The Wehrmacht would never authorize such an operation. The casualty projection alone would result in court-martial for the planning officer. Yet they executed it without hesitation, and their invasion succeeded partly because they were willing to die in numbers we would consider unacceptable. He paused, then added quietly, "Perhaps that is why they won." The D-Day operations revealed the cumulative strategic impact of 4 years of commando raids. At Pegasus Bridge, Major John Howard's glider-borne troops captured the bridge intact in a 10-minute coup de main, preventing German armor from counterattacking British airborne forces. At Point du Hoc, U.S. Rangers, trained by British Commandos, scaled 100-foot cliffs under fire to destroy artillery positions. Along the invasion beaches, specialized units cleared obstacles using techniques refined through years of raids. The methodological patience had paid off. Every lesson learned through blood on Norwegian fjords and French beaches now informed operations at continental scale. German defenders fought with the courage and competence expected of professional soldiers. They inflicted horrific casualties, particularly on Omaha Beach, where American forces nearly failed to establish a beachhead. Yet the defenses that should have thrown the invasion back into the sea held for hours rather than days. Mobile reserves, which should have counterattacked within hours, arrived piecemeal over days. The Atlantic Wall, which propaganda described as impregnable, proved to be exactly what Rommel feared: concrete monuments offering psychological rather than tactical security. In the weeks following D-Day, as Allied forces broke out from Normandy and began the liberation of France, captured German officers provided candid assessments to interrogators. These reports, classified for decades, revealed the psychological impact of commando operations on German strategic thinking. General Lieutenant Wilhelm Richter, whose 716th Infantry Division defended Sword Beach, stated, "We prepared for 4 years. We built fortifications, trained troops, studied Allied capabilities. Yet when invasion came, we discovered our preparations were inadequate. The enemy understood our defenses better than we did. They had studied us through years of raids, learning our procedures, testing our responses, identifying our weaknesses. We defended against the enemy we imagined. They became the enemy we could not imagine." Oberst Ernst Goth, captured near Caen in July, was more philosophical. "The commandos taught us to fear the darkness, to suspect the silence, to understand that small forces could achieve disproportionate results. This defensive mindset, multiplied across thousands of kilometers of coastline, created paralysis at operational scale. We could not concentrate forces because we feared attacks everywhere. We could not predict invasion timing because raids came constantly. The commandos did not win the war, but they created conditions making our defeat inevitable." Perhaps the most telling assessment came from a junior officer, Lieutenant Hans Weber, who wrote in his diary before capture, "They were unlike any soldiers we faced, not because they were braver or better armed, but because they refused to accept that some things were impossible." August 15th, 1944. Southern France. Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of Provence, commenced with commandos and American special forces clearing coastal defenses ahead of the main landings. The operation proceeded with a smoothness that would have seemed miraculous 4 years earlier, but now reflected hard-won expertise. German defenders, already demoralized by the Normandy breakout and Allied advances across France, surrendered in thousands. The Atlantic Wall, that expensive monument to defensive paranoia, collapsed not from overwhelming force but from strategic exhaustion, the accumulated weight of 4 years spent defending everywhere against an enemy who could strike anywhere. In prisoner of war camps across England, captured German officers processed their defeat through the lens of professional analysis. Many had been superb soldiers, tactically competent, brave under fire, dedicated to their units and missions. They had fought for a regime whose ideology ranged from morally bankrupt to actively evil, yet they had maintained professional standards even as their cause collapsed. Now, in the aftermath of defeat, they confronted uncomfortable questions about military culture, national character, and the nature of modern warfare. A series of informal discussions among senior German officers, monitored by British intelligence, revealed remarkable consensus. The Commandos had not merely been elite troops, they had represented a different philosophy of warfare entirely. Traditional European military culture emphasized collective action, hierarchical discipline, and technological superiority. The Commandos emphasized individual capability, decentralized decision-making, and moral conviction. Traditional doctrine treated soldiers as replaceable components in a military machine. The Commandos treated each soldier as irreplaceable, investing years in training individuals to achieve what conventional doctrine said required companies or battalions. Most fundamentally, the Commandos fought from a position of moral clarity that Germany's finest soldiers could not match. They volunteered for near-suicidal missions not from fanaticism, but from conviction that their cause was just and their sacrifice meaningful. They endured training that killed some and broke others because they believed Britain's survival justified any personal cost. They maintained discipline as prisoners of war because they saw themselves as warriors whose war continued even in captivity. General Major Anton Weiss, who had captured and interrogated commandos throughout the war, summarized it in a letter to his wife discovered after his death in 1947. "We trained magnificent soldiers. They trained crusaders. We fought for conquest, for glory, for the abstraction of the Reich. They fought for survival, for freedom, for the concrete reality of home and family. In the end, this made all the difference. They were willing to die for what they believed. We discovered too late that we were not." The British Commandos were formally disbanded in 1946, their mission accomplished, their methods institutionalized throughout Allied military doctrine. The men returned to ordinary lives, to shops and schools and factories carrying scars and memories of actions that would remain classified for decades. Some thrived in peacetime, translating wartime discipline into civilian success. Others struggled, haunted by losses and experiences that could not be explained to those who had not shared them. All carried the knowledge that they had participated in something extraordinary, a military experiment that changed warfare's fundamental calculus. The German officers who survived the war returned to a nation divided and occupied, their military traditions discredited by the regime they had served. Many wrote memoirs, attempting to process their experiences through professional analysis. These works, published in the 1950s and 1960s, consistently returned to the Commandos as representing something unprecedented in their military experience, not merely elite troops, but soldiers who operated according to principles that challenged everything they had been taught about warfare's mathematics and morality. The legacy endures in modern special operations forces worldwide. The techniques refined by the Commandos, small unit tactics, specialized training, emphasis on individual capability, acceptance of high-risk missions, now constitute standard doctrine for every serious military power. The psychological lessons proved equally important, that defense requires more resources than offense, that moral conviction multiplies combat effectiveness, that innovation trumps tradition when survival is at stake. Yet perhaps the most important lesson was simpler and more profound. The Commandos proved that ordinary men, properly trained and motivated, could achieve extraordinary results. They were not supermen, merely volunteers who refused to accept that Britain's survival was impossible, who trained until the impossible became merely difficult, who fought until the difficult became accomplished fact. They came from a defeated army, trained on a besieged island, launched raids that conventional wisdom said would fail, and through cumulative small victories, changed the war's trajectory. 70 years later, historians still debate their strategic impact. Some argue the raids were pinpricks, dramatic but ultimately irrelevant compared to industrial production and conventional military operations. Others see them as decisive psychological warfare that forced Germany into unsustainable defensive dispersion. Both sides agree on one fact: the German officers were right. The British commandos were unlike any soldiers they had faced, not because they were superhuman, but because they were supremely human, carrying mortality's weight toward immortal purpose. They went into darkness so their nation could see the dawn.